The Mariners have hit their lowest point of the season thus far, and we could talk about that, or we could talk about all the roster moves they made, because that's a little less saddening, I think. Yeah, let's do that on today's episode of Locked On Mariners. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Monday, May 23rd, 2022, and this is the Locked On Mariners podcast brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. I am your host, Ty Gonzalez, reporter and editor over at allseahawks.com, joined as always by my co-host, Colby Patnode. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, CANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. Be sure to also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/control the zone. We typically post 2 additional shows on there every week, and we get into some bigger ideas and bigger topics, whereas, Locked On Mariners covers more of the day-to-day with the M's. We also get into some non-baseball discussions on there as well. It's a fun time, so be sure to check it out. Again, that's patreon.com/control the zone. And if this is your first time joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast, welcome to the show. If you like what you hear, give us a follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to this. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to be not talking about the weekend series. We're just going to completely ignore that. But we are going to be talking about the possibility of the Mariners becoming sellers this year, because they are in a pretty big hole, one that they can certainly dig themselves out of still, but it's certainly a fairly deep hole. And we're also going to be talking about Taylor Trammell getting called up, surprisingly, and Abraham Toro, unfortunately, going on the injured list. But first, let's talk about Justin Upton, who is the newest member of the Seattle Mariners, signing a major league contract with the team on Saturday night. He's going to extended spring training. Obviously, has spent the last few years with the Angels, but they outright released him coming out of spring training this year. To save nearly $30 million. Or, well, they didn't save it, but, they just wanted to cut their ties at that point. So Upton obviously has struggled over the last 3 years. He hasn't posted a WRC plus over 100 since 2018. Colby, is there anything here to maybe be excited about with Upton?
That he finally got so desperate to keep playing Major League Baseball that he finally agreed to play for the Mariners. You guys may not remember, but Upton famously invoked his no-trade clause back in the winter of, I believe it was 2014. The Mariners had a deal. They were going to send Taijuan Walker and Nick Franklin and I believe Charlie Furbush down to Arizona for Upton, and Upton didn't want to play for Seattle, so he said no. Upton, run from it, what, blah, blah, blah. Destiny arrives all the same. He's a Seattle Mariner, or at least he's in the organization. He's down and extended right now. Going to be there for about a week, and then he's going to go up to Tacoma, probably be there for another week. So we're probably looking at, June 10 as a realistic timetable for him. Mm-hmm. Got to actually play and see live pitching. He hasn't done that in about 6 weeks, so we'll see how aggressive the Mariners want to be. Upton has been a very good player for his entire career. Not really the last 3 years. There's been some injury concerns. He hasn't played over 100 games in any of those 3 years. Defensively, he's not good, but mm-hmm. You're running Jesse Winker out there, so outfield defense, maybe not that big of a deal to Seattle. But I believe his role is actually to come in and be the DH, primarily against lefties would be my guess here. Even last year when he was struggling, he did throw up a 130 WRC plus against left-handed pitching, so 30% above league average. He's 225, 355, 483. Did strike out a ton, 29% of the time against lefties last year, but he did also walk 16% of the time. So he's kind of a 3 true outcome type of guy. uh, against lefties, and the Mariners just looking to add some pop to the middle of their lineup, and they have struggled against left-handed pitching this year. So having Upton in there, maybe he's a pure platoon with Winker, although Winker's handled lefties okay this year. So
Yeah.
I think it's just, hey, let's add this veteran. There's definitely a floor here. The floor is probably higher than Dylan Moore. It's probably higher than now Taylor Trammell. And it also is a little bit of insurance against Kyle Lewis, who may or may not be getting called up today. He left the game after only 2 at-bats yesterday. Today's the end of his rehab stint, so they kind of have to make a call there. So we'll see what they decide to do with that. But, yeah, I would think Upton's kind of a hedge against that, and he's also just kind of a right-handed power bat. And, he did have a really, really good spring. He says he's healthy now. So maybe, just maybe, 2018 Justin Upton, maybe there's still 70% of that player somewhere in Upton, and it's worth a shot. It's $500,000, and it's really nothing to the Mariners. And if he can hit lefties even for a month or two until Haniger's ready to go, it's well worth the $500,000.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a no risk, moderate reward opportunity here. Let's go into the last 3 years, though, because that's really when he's been struggling. That's kind of the peak of that. And also, you mentioned the injuries, of course. But just diving into some of the numbers here. Last 3 seasons combined, he's slashing 211, 299, 414 with a 91 WRC plus. And then we'll look at left-handed pitchers here, or against left-handed pitchers. He's slashing 196, 299, 438 with a 97 WRC plus. So he's just kind of been hovering around average. He's very slightly below average, pretty much over the last 3 years. Which, hey, that's not exciting by any means, but that's significantly better than what the Mariners have been running out in right field the last, And obviously he's not going to be necessarily filling that particular role, but I mean, that's one of the biggest, black holes in the Mariners lineup right now. And presumably they're going to find ways for him to kind of make up for that, even if he's in a different role and they, obviously put someone else out there in right field. So it's an interesting get. I mean, we talked about this last week with the trade market, because right now, a move was needed. A move still is needed, to be clear here. But the trade market, of course, it's kind of stagnant right now, because you're still at the start of the season where no one was really super motivated to sell right now. And so, even with a team like the Orioles or the Pirates, who I think we know was not going to be competing for anything this year, even they're kind of still just hanging on right now and seeing how everything goes. And no one is really, antsy to make the first move. They're not antsy to be the first seller, to proclaim themselves as that. So there's all of that goes into it. But Upton is he's a fun player when he's playing well, and obviously a very accomplished player, and brings some pedigree to this roster, which is still relatively young, even with some of the veterans that they brought in this past off season. And I prefer it over Steven Souza Jr. and honestly I would prefer it over even Taylor Trammell right now, who's while I obviously believe there's a ton more upside with Trameall in the future, that might not be seen through this particular year. He might need to go back to AAA and work on some things still. It just kind of seems a little bit early. We're going to be talking about that in a second. But overall, Upton is better than what they had, and that's about it. And that says more about what they had before they signed him than anything. But it is somewhat of maybe a step in the right direction here, where maybe he can level out that lineup a little bit. It's just, at least he can run into one, right? He can run into one. He gives them more pop, like you mentioned. That's something that they've been kind of lacking, particularly near the bottom of their lineup. He's not a black hole. At least I don't think he is. He's not great, but he's not a black hole.
Yeah, particularly against lefties. Um, yeah, he's kind of a. By the way, he's still sneaky fast.
Sure.
61st percentile in sprint speed last year. He's typically going to be closer to around 50th percentile. So he's not clogging you on the bases. But he's not a burner. Did steal a couple bags last year, but that's not really what he does anymore. You're just hoping he pops a couple home runs, and I don't think Upton's going to be up for the entire year. I don't think that this is just a permanent fixture now. I think he's a stopgap until you get to Haniger or until somebody is willing to trade you an upgrade at the spot. And thanks. I mean, there's still some good skills here. He's 67th percentile in average exit velo, 79th percentile in barrel percentage, 73rd percentile in base on ball percentage, 69th percentile, nice in chase rate, 53rd percentile in hard hit rate, 52nd percentile in X slug. There's some tools here that can produce a contributor at the very least. The big issue for Upton has been the whiffs. He's swinging and missing at a lot of pitches, and that's an issue, obviously. So mostly breaking balls he's struggling with, but last year he also struggled with the fastball. So he's just it's he's making good swing decisions. He's just not making contact, and that's the big problem. So again, watch to see what he looks like, because he was very good in the spring this year.
Yeah, going back to his numbers over the last 3 seasons, 29.1% K rate, that jumps up to 33% against the lefties. So even though he hits lefties better, he's still swinging and missing a lot against them. So that's something to keep an eye on. He also walks a little bit, 12.5% of the time against lefties, 10.5% just overall over the last 3 years. So there is, for some of the percentiles that you listed from Savant and from some of these numbers here, there are some positives. There is, and if he's healthy, there is certainly, if you squint, you can see like maybe him actually contributing here. Does that lead to him sticking for the whole year? Probably not. Especially if Kyle Lewis can stick at the big league level, and Haniger comes back in July as he's expected to. Then there probably just isn't a fit naturally, especially if they're gonna go out and add. But right now, who knows if they're gonna go out and add? Maybe they stand pat with where they are right now because of where the record is and all that. Yeah. So,
I mean, if he can hit 230, 300, 450, he's going to help you. So
yeah, that absolutely helps. That's unfortunately better than a third of your lineup right now, at least. So, yeah. And again, that says more about the Mariners than Justin Upton right now, but that's where we are. So the Mariners made some more moves yesterday before yesterday's heartbreaking loss, disappointing loss, sad, depressing. I don't know. You figure out what you want to call it. Yeah, totally. Yeah, my mistake. There was no game played yesterday, nor were there the 3 days before that. But we're going to be talking about Taylor Trammell. We're going to be talking about Abraham Toro, and of course, Sam Haggerty, or Ham Swaggerty, the return. But first, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by Built Bar. I love brownies, but you know what I love more? Brownie batter. Sometimes I eat half the batter just while I'm making the brownies. Now imagine if you could lick that brownie spatula clean and get some protein in. Well, you're in luck, because Built has a new creation, and this one is better than ever. The Brownie Batter Puff. This puff takes protein bars to a whole new level, and they're available right now on Built.com. With 140 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 7 grams of sugar, Brownie Batter Puffs are the perfect pick-me-up for any day. All Built Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means with Built, you can eat healthy and actually enjoy doing it. So go try some for yourself at Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15, that's LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. Again, that's LOCKED15 for 15% off your order at Built.com. You're listening to Locked On Mariners. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast with recaps of MLB games with analysis from our local experts, taking fans through the season like no other network. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts, just like us. So, before yesterday's game, the Mariners made a handful of moves. Steven Souza, gone. little too late, Mariners, but he's gone. It's over. We can move past that unfortunate era of Mariners baseball that was this past week. Taylor Trammell, though, was his replacement, and that was a bit of a surprise. There was no inkling that Trammell was going to be coming up. He, of course, suffered a significant hamstring injury in, I believe, the Rainiers' second game of the year, third game of the year.
Third.
Yeah, it was pretty early on, and I frankly I didn't even know he was playing down in extended spring training, but that's where they called him up from. He did not go back to Tacoma post injury, and he's now with the big league team. He walked yesterday. That was nice. Also struck out, but he did walk. He got on base, so not a terrible first outing for Trammell in this one. I mean, Colby, you and I are big fans of Trammell, particularly the person that he is, but also, we think that he's going to be pretty dang good eventually. Just needs some time. Obviously, needs some time to work on some things. Obviously, showed some nice stuff last year. And by the way, this was the first time that all four players acquired in the Austin Nola trade with the Padres was on the Mariners Major League roster at once. So Ty France, Luis Torrens, Andres Munoz, and now Taylor Trammell all on the roster together. And that's the thing too, right? Is like we've seen Torrens pop a little bit. We've seen Munoz pop a little bit. Obviously, Ty France is Ty France. Yeah, and I know Munoz. We're not talking about that. We are not talking about that. We are completely ignoring that. That it did not happen. But yeah, Trammell, who was kind of seen as the prize of that deal, hasn't really gotten it going yet. So, I mentioned earlier that I still think that Trammell needs time in Tacoma to work on some things. I find this call up a little bit weird. I know that they don't have many options, and he was one of the few options that they had on the 40-man roster in particular. Do you agree with the notion that he should probably be sent down? Maybe he's even the move if they call up Kyle Lewis today.
Yeah, it's possible, although it seems weird that you would call a guy up, fly him to Boston, and then demote him the next day.
Yeah.
Especially since obviously they didn't care about any PR backlash with Souza. Why not just keep him on the roster for one more day? So that would be kind of weird. But I suppose it's possible. Yeah, it's Trammell needs time down in AAA. He probably needs a whole year, or at least a good chunk of it. Last year he ran a 42% strikeout rate. It's not sustainable, and there were a lot of things to like about Taylor last year. Showed some real power, which we knew he had some pop, but he showed legitimate 30 home run power. When he was up last year, he was a plus defender in center field. Granted, in a small sample size, but he was still very good defensively. Runs well. He's a great athlete. There's, if he pops, if you have him when he pops, you got a shot at an all-star like that. That's the upside of Taylor Trammell. Whether or not that's going to happen anytime in the next 3 or 4 years, I don't know. Trammell could be one of those guys who doesn't pop until he's 28. And he's playing for Cleveland or something like that. So that's kind of the risk with Trammell, is that you don't want to give up on him because his upside is legitimately an all-star caliber center fielder. But we really have no indication of how close he is. So what does he do for the Mariners right now? He's an upgrade defensively over anybody else they have out there.
That's true.
He is a guy who walks. Even last year he walked plenty, almost 10%. He walked yesterday. He's got a very good eye, very good CTZ type of approach there. And he's definitely got some pull power that he can get to. So yeah, there's a lot of tools here, but it just feels weird to me that you brought Trammell across the country, you play him one game, 2 at-bats, and then that's it. I don't know. It feels very weird. I guess anything to avoid calling up Billy Hamilton appears to be the Mariners' motto right now. We'll see how long he's up. But, yeah, I'm rooting for Taylor as long as he's up. He's a great guy. Really fun player when he's on, when he's clicking. And, if the Mariners just so happen to catch some lightning in a bottle here, and he gets on a little bit of a roll, he can really help for a couple weeks. So we'll see what the plan is overall for him. I don't think this is a long-term thing. I would suspect it's, maybe he's the guy who gets sent down when Upton is ready. I don't know exactly what the plan is here, but yeah, very surprising that he was the guy who was called up yesterday.
And then on the flip side of that, Sam Haggerty also gets called up, but for some unfortunate reasons. Abraham Toro goes on the 10-day IL, and this really sucks because Toro had been hitting pretty well on this road trip. On this road trip, he was slashing 304, 346, 609 with a 177 WRC plus. 2 home runs for him, of course. So yeah, that's just it's a pretty significant blow. He was also performing fairly well defensively. It just hurts all around because this team is lacking contributors right now offensively, and now you're taking one of their biggest contributors over the last week and a half. How much does the Toro loss hurt the Mariners, and when do you think we might be able to see him again?
Well, since you always ask me this, I assume you want me to show my medical degree.
Yes, absolutely.
I do not know how long he's going to be out for. He injured, I believe, was a shoulder, right, in a collision with Adam Frazier. Doesn't seem like a good thing, but I haven't heard anything about how long he might be out for. Hopefully not too long because, like you mentioned, he was one of your better players. Ty, would you believe that Abraham Toro is 81st percentile and outs above average right now? So he's also helping you quite a bit defensively, mostly at second base, but also a little bit at third. And it limits what you can do. It's kind of tough. It's kind of tough with Frazier now. Frazier probably not going to play much outfield. You still have Moore who could play second base, but we've seen the bat there. So yeah, you kind of lose a pretty good bat at second or third if you wanted to give Suarez a day or DH Suarez maybe. And Toro is significantly better than Dylan Moore at third base. So yeah, you kind of lose something defensively. You lose some high probability contact from Toro at the bottom of your lineup, which is going to lead to more strikeouts because, well, Dylan Moore strikes out. So yeah, it's a bummer, man. Your team definitely got worse over the weekend from losing Toro. Sam Haggerty is what he is. I mean, there's nothing. He's a high contact guy. He's can play, a little bit of everywhere. Probably don't want him to play shortstop, but he can handle second. He can handle the outfield. He's a very fast guy. Provides some speed. I don't think he's going to start a lot, but he's definitely a useful player to have on the bench. And he played okay. I remember a stretch last year. I believe it was in Boston and in Baltimore where Haggerty was like the best player on the Mariners. He showed some power. He hit one onto Utah Street. In Baltimore, I believe the second Mariner to ever do that, the first being Griffey. So, yeah, Haggerty's a fun guy, and obviously, we have fun with his, what is that called, his spoonerism, ham swaggerty. So, I'm rooting for him, but yeah, there's not a ton here to get excited about from the player.
There's some character though. There's some character with the ham swaggerty thing. So pretty easy to root for him, at least on that front. And we're at that part of the season where that's what we're holding on to now to root for this team. It's not a
team
great time.
Fun, baby.
Yeah.
Team fun.
Yeah.
No,
I'm embracing the fun. I'm embracing the fun again. We're bringing that back. We're going back to last year. This was something that we said when it was starting to look a little bleak. And hey, they went on a run towards the end of the year when we started embracing the fun. So let's just hashtag embrace the fun here.
I'm just saying,
just go along for the ride.
I'm just saying the Seattle Mariners right now have the exact same record as the 2019 Washington Nationals did in their first 42 games or whatever it is. And if you don't know why that matters, look it up.
Basically, what Colby is saying is Julio Rodriguez is Juan Soto. It's exactly what he just said.
More or less. Yeah, it's been for a month, but yeah, I mean.
It's true. Yeah, he had a really good series.
Nice series. Yeah. A
Yeah.
couple strikeouts that were ill-timed,
Yeah.
but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
He's 21.
Yeah. We can't all be perfect, of course. So the Mariners right now are 17 and 25. They're 5.5 out of the third wild card right now in the American League. Um, Still not necessarily in the cellar of the American League in terms of the standings, and of course, it's still incredibly early. We're only a quarter of the way through the season at this point, and a lot of time to turn this thing around. A lot of time to 5.5 games is nothing at this point. So we are not by any means waving the white flag here. But if this does not get any better and this extends into June and maybe even July, I mean, it's going to become pretty clear that the Mariners are not going to be doing anything this season. So at that point, the question is, do they become sellers or do they just try to hold on to what they did this offseason and just regroup next winter and try to build on that? But if they do sell, who do you think might be on the way out for the Mariners, or some players that they might be willing to listen on?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the entire bullpen, including Paul
Mm-hmm.
Sewald. Sewald probably get him something pretty interesting. You get 2 years of him in addition to the rest of this year. He's been very good for a year. You're probably not going to get anything elite for him just because the track record is relatively short, but you should be able to get something pretty nice for Paul Sewald. The catchers, particularly Terens or Murphy, if Murphy ever gets healthy, he
Yeah.
did suffer a setback, so we'll see. But backup catchers who can hit a little bit are in kind, and both Terens and Murphy are good enough defensively that that's not going to deter a team. And Ty, you and I have looked at this catcher market, or the upcoming catcher market via trade, and it
Mm-hmm.
is rough. So if the
Yeah.
Mariners have both of those guys out there, then they will generate some interest there. Probably more than people think. They probably get something a little more than people think they could get for Murphy or Terens right now. Abraham Toro is a guy who's probably going to get asked about, but because he's got 5 years of club control and he's only 25, I really don't see them moving him for a prospect or two. They might move him in a deal to get a better major leaguer that will be around for a couple years, but probably not going to move him. I don't think Mitch Haniger is going to have much trade value, so I
Mm-hmm.
honestly don't see, especially if he's out till July. I mean,
What
you're
about
going to get?
what about Adam Frazier? Because
Yep,
this is a guy that's
probably.
he's a rental right now, but he still fits your timeline. He's been playing well. We talked about extending him.
Hmm.
Do you still entertain that possibility even if you're in a losing
I would.
situation? Yeah, I would too.
Yeah, my first thought on Frazier would be let's get an extension done.
Hmm.
Because again, remember, it's not just about 2022. The goal is not to win in 2022. I mean, it is in 2022, but the long term goal is not to 2022 is it, and then we gotta completely re-rack. Like that's
Yeah,
not the goal here. So
yeah,
I would try to work out an extension with him. He's been more or less as advertised. He's just a solid big leaguer. I mean, there's nothing too terribly exciting about him, but he's just solid. Gets the job done. He will have a starting 9 spot on a good team. But yeah, he's probably going to be available, but because he's a rental, probably not going to get a ton for him. But you might get something interesting. Maybe you get like the pitching equivalent of Abraham Toro. Um, I think the Mariners maybe entertain Jesse Winker, but at that point you're selling so low on him,
yeah. No.
and you have him for another year, and it's just like, then you have to go out and replace, the bat that you think Winker is eventually going to become. You kind of run into this issue where the Mariners, because they're not going to completely tear down, they're not going to punt 2023. They're going to be very hesitant to trade pieces that they think can help them in 2023.
What about Chris
Uh,
Flexen?
I don't think you're going to get much for Flexen.
Mm,
He's a number 4. I mean, he is under club control for a year and a half, so maybe you get a little bit more than you gave up to get Tyler Anderson. So Carter Benz. But yeah, I think some team would have interest in flexing. Maybe like a fringe playoff team. Minnesota, for some reason, seems like they could maybe use a back end starter. And I mean, you're not going to get like Luis Ariz or anything like that, but you might get somebody fringy, interesting. But yeah, I think that's what you're looking at. I think the only guys who are absolutely totally off limits this July, J.P. Crawford, Ty France, Julio, Gilbert, Kirby.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you put Marco on the trade block, you would get some decent interest in him. I just don't think anybody's going to pay the Mariners what they would need for it to make sense for them to trade Marco, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
because from the outside, right, Marco is just, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's boring, to the outside eye.
Not sexy.
Right?
Yeah.
And not sexy either. But,
yeah, just beat Max Scherzer and Kevin Gossman in a 5-day stretch. But yeah, he's
exactly.
Just kind of mediocre. Yeah, not very good.
Well, and unfortunately, that's actually how teams view him, right? You go back to when the Mariners were really at the start of this rebuild, and the thought of trading Marco was kind of out there. No team was really, offering anything close to what the Mariners felt was worth it, and that's probably not going to continue. And that's probably going to continue where Marco's not going to be valued the way that he needs to be.
He should be.
Yeah.
He's a 3-win pitcher, regardless of how sexy it is. He's a 3-win pitcher. That's worth something, especially with his contract. I'd kind of heard, like, I don't know if this is a joke or not, but I did hear that like the Yankees were kind of interested in Marco back in 2019, winter of 2019 or 2020. But it was like that, like, oh yeah, well maybe we'll give you like Miguel Andujar, like literally that meme. Is kind of what the Yankees were offering, and it's just no. There's no reason to do that. I have two things here I'm going to throw at you.
Mm-hmm.
First off, let's start with this. Let's just assume that the Mariners kind of go 500 from here until July, the All-Star break. Let's just say the All-Star break, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they're still very barely in it. Maybe they're just out of it. But regardless, they're whatever. Would you be more surprised if they made a significant selling move or a significant buying move?
Significant selling as in like Winker?
More like
that.
Frazier, Seawald, like that type of group. Like a real contributor.
Then significant buying. If it was someone with if it was a veteran with like club control, like Winker, then I'd be more surprised by that. But Frazier, I could see them moving on from Frazier for the reason that we talked about. He's a rental, and hey, maybe he doesn't have interest in re-signing in Seattle. Sewald, he's a reliever. He's a reliever. Yeah, and I love Paul Sewald, and I know the organization loves Paul Sewald, but he's a reliever at the end of the day, and you want to maximize that reliever's value because there's no guarantee whatsoever that he's ever going to be that valuable again. And so if that opportunity presented itself to them, then I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if that's how you're describing it, where they're 8 games under or 5 games under or whatever around, July, the All-Star break. But yeah, if they went out and significantly bought someone, I mean, that also wouldn't really be a surprise to me either, because we've seen the Mariners do that before, kind of like not like they did. Yeah, like they didn't go out and like get a star by any means, but they went out and they bought something that they wanted. They bought a couple of things that they wanted last year.
So you would be more surprised basically if they made, how am I trying to word? You would be more surprised if they made like another Diego Castillo deal as opposed to another Kendall Graveman deal. You know what I mean? Like, because the Graveman deal was kind of a seller's move, but not really. But you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's the thing too, right? Is like if they trade Paul Sewald and they're not getting like prospects back, they're trading Paul Sewald and they're getting like another Abraham Toro or what have you.
Yeah.
That would be.
Like technically I don't know.
I don't feel like. Really. I don't feel like either one, honestly, would be that surprising because Jerry Dipoto and his team, I mean, really
Yeah.
anything is possible. It doesn't really matter what position they're in at the deadline. Obviously, naturally teams are going to be more inclined to sell in that position, and they most certainly would. But yeah, even if they're 20 games under 500, I could see them buying something that's, under club control for 2-3 years and fits their timeline in the future. That's just kind of always been their MO. So yeah, honestly, maybe my answer would be more so I'd be surprised if they didn't do either of those things, right?
Right. They
Like, I
probably
feel
do
like
a little bit of both.
yeah, I feel like they end up doing both because like they
Probably.
still because even like let's think about it real quick, and we gotta hop off here though. But just real quick, just to wrap up on this note, the Mariners have constantly talked, and Jerry Dipoto specifically has talked about 2023 kind of being the year, and this has been kind of the language used over the last few years, even pre-pandemic. But then you talk about the pandemic and how that basically erased 100 plus games of development for, the minors and the majors. No minor league season whatsoever. They lost 100 games at the major league level. They lost a lot of time of development. And then last year happened, and that kind of pushed the timeline up. But maybe that was a mirage, right? Maybe the timeline has always been the same as it was at the start of the rebuild. And, because a lot of this right now is predicated on the success and the growth of players like Julio Rodriguez and Jerry Kelenic, et cetera. So, I don't think that changes, really. I don't think the mindset really changes for the Mariners in the sense that and this, goes into the whole conversation about Jerry and whether or not to keep Jerry around. And we're probably going to touch on that at some point later this week on Locked On Mariners. But, if the timeline is still 2023 for them, as they have said in the past, and yeah, things have changed over the course of time, but still 2023 has really been that target year for them to really go for it, then yeah, I would figure that even no matter the situation they find themselves in this year, they're going to add to bolster that 2023 roster if the opportunity presents itself to them.
Yeah. I think you're right. So just real fast, just to wrap this up, I do want to throw one hypothetical trade at you.
Sure.
Just thought of it live, so this probably isn't very good, but I'll throw it at you anyways.
Go for it.
Kind of in the Abraham Toro-esque type of mold here.
Sure.
The Chicago White Sox have been getting horrific production from their second baseman. A guy like Adam Frazier, probably going to appeal to them.
Sure.
So would you trade Adam Frazier for Jake Burger?
Ooh, that's an interesting move. Burger's pretty interesting. It's just, does he fit 2023 better than Frazier?
Well, I mean, I think at this point you have to in this scenario you'd have to assume Frazier's not interested in an extension.
Re-signing. Yeah, then at that point, sure. Yeah, if there's absolutely, or if there's a guarantee that I'm not getting Frazier back for 2023, then
not in season. Maybe you re-sign him.
Maybe. But if he's not willing to sign an extension, that probably doesn't bode well for his.
Maybe he just wants to see what's on the market.
Sure, that's true too. But yeah, if it's pretty clear that I'm not going to be able to get that done, yeah, why not? Just take a chance on Burger, who is major league ready, I would say, even though that he got sent down again recently. And you can also give him a better shot to actually play at the major league level.
Yeah, pretty much play him every day.
Yeah, because what other major league ready piece are you going to get for Adam Frazier?
Maybe a reliever.
Yeah, which I'd rather go with the position player, quite frankly.
Yeah,
and
Burger's he's a tough fit because he's not a great third baseman, and you obviously already have Ty France. But what if he is Ty France? You know what I mean? And
yeah, that's true.
Then, but yeah, just thought that up. I'll have to flush it out a little bit more, but I think that's an interesting, at least, start.
Yes, it's not bad. And, same or similar idea could be applied to Paul Sewald as well. Not necessarily Burger, but, getting someone that is kind of the Burger mold in terms of, timeline. So, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to be creative with it, and one thing we do know is that Jerry Dipoto is going to get creative with it whenever he does, and he's going to do something that, even if we spend every single episode from this moment forward talking about trade candidates, he'll still find someone that we didn't talk about. Because
Always.
of course, that's what Jerry does. All right, well, that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dane Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DaneGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen of the day, just like you do here every day. Now make your second listen of the day Locked On MLB. That's where Paul Francis Sullivan, and please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on the Major League's present and past. It's free wherever you get your podcast, just like us. So have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we will see you tomorrow. Peace.